Well, I apologize for that singing. I probably should have turned my mic off. This text is always a difficult one. When Jesus says to take up your cross and follow me, or pick up your cross and follow me. We were at a dinner group last night, and we were there with one of the many Lindas in our congregation, and we started talking about names. Michelle and I are having a daughter. We've been thinking about names, and the list of names keeps getting longer, and we're having trouble picking a name. And so we started talking about the meaning of names, and Linda said she didn't want to be. It's one of the Lindas. So, Lisa said, well, did you know Linda means beautiful? She goes, yeah, I did. It's my cross to bear. Which is, you hear that from many people. It's my cross to bear. The idea that we all have a cross to bear. But when Jesus says, pick up your cross and follow me, it's more than just some kind of burden that we have. The burden of beauty or the burden of something. It's really something that Jesus is calling us to do that is not a real pleasant idea. Pick up your cross and follow me. And I think when we hear that, us Americans in the grocery bag culture that we live in, think about picking it up with everything else. How many, I know you all, when you get the grocery bags, how many can you carry at one time? Like, you sit 2 on this finger and 3 on this finger, and you try and bring in 10 bags at one time, right? Because that's our lives. We try and carry so many things at one time. Because as Americans, if you're not multitasking, you're not doing enough. Right? It's part of who we are. And so when Jesus says to pick up your cross, you think, okay, well, I can pick up my Christianity, but just so you know, I've got a lot of other things going on as well. But that's not what Jesus is saying. Jesus is saying you have to put everything else down if you're really going to pick up the cross and follow me. And I think the hardest things for us to put down are the things I'd like to talk to you about today. The first thing that we have to put down is our desire to be in control. Michelle and I went and looked at our house that's being built on Friday afternoon, and Friday was a rainy day. And the house, around the house is all muddy. And they had this little stretch of paper that was leading up to the house that you could walk on so you could get into the house without getting muddy. And so we walked in. It was a little slippery on the way in, and we went and looked through the house, and then we were walking out, and Michelle went first, and I took one step. And I felt like I was back in Detroit and had just hit ice. It was literally one of those moments where my feet just came out. Have you ever done this? And you have that instant second where your feet is in the air and your whole body's in the air, and it's like you're floating. Have you had that moment? And you're thinking to yourself in that moment, this is really going to hurt. Because I have no control anymore. That's what the difficult part about giving up control is that at times it hurts and it's scary because you don't know what's going to happen. But that's what God called Abraham to do, was to give up control of his own life, to leave his people, to go to somewhere that he had never been before, and to start a new life with a promise that I know you're 99 years old and it doesn't make sense to you, but I promise you, you will have descendants. As a matter of fact, you will be the father of nations. Your descendants will be kings, which is a hard thing for somebody to hear who has no descendants. But they're actually going to be king? My descendant is going to be a king? Just trust me. That's what God says. My family, when my sister and her then husband she was pregnant with our first nephew, my parents' first grandchild. They were living in Chicago. He was working at Sears headquarters in Hoffman Estates as a contractor, had a great job. And they left everything behind in Chicago to move to Detroit, to be by my parents, so that when my nephew was born, they'd be there for him to grow up, to help out, to do all these things. And so he left his great job at Sears headquarters in Hoffman Estates, Illinois, and moved to Detroit to be by my parents, where my father had a great job working for Kmart World headquarters. Literally within months of them moving, Kmart bought Sears and relocated my dad to Sears headquarters in Hoffman Estates. Literally the same campus that he was working on. it's just a reminder that as much as we think we're in control, things can happen at any moment. Things happen with our jobs. We are moved. We were talking about as we're doing our capital campaign about, I don't know how much longer I'm going to live here with the job that I have. And so many of us in this congregation are one phone call away from our boss, and we're packing up and moving somewhere else, right? You can't control those things. And you can't control your life. I was with Carrie Mitchell this week, visiting her mother, Elda Huber, 95 years old, assisted living, in rehab, then going to assisted living. And she said to me, Elda, I was praying for her, and she said, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go. I've had a great life. And I had to say to her, unfortunately, that's not our decision. We're not in control. And that's the truth. So we have to give up our desire to be in control. Second thing I think we have to give up is our desire to be right all the time. Does anybody else have that desire to be right all the time? I heard this great story about Billy Graham offered to meet with Lutheran pastors in an area. And what a gift to Lutheran pastors to be able to meet with Billy Graham, right? The great evangelist. And so if you're a Lutheran pastor and you're meeting with Billy Graham, you would be excited, right? You would show up and you'd ask all these questions because Billy Graham is doing something that Lutherans struggle with, evangelizing. And instead, for an hour, Lutheran pastors told Billy Graham all the things he was doing wrong. And afterwards, Billy Graham said, I appreciate all your comments. And I realize that my ministry is not perfect, and if you have ideas for me to better my ministry, that's great. I'm open to all suggestions. But I just want you to know that I like the way I'm doing it more than I like the way you're not doing it. A lot of times, we don't do things because we don't know the right way to do things. But we make fun of others who are trying. The thing about Christianity is, it starts with realizing that you're not a good person, that you're a sinner. We start every worship with confession because we realize that we have fallen short of what God has intended for us and that we are sinful people and that we need Jesus to die for us to save us. The start of Christianity is I am wrong. It's not I am right. So we have to give up that desire to always be right. And finally, I think we have to give up the desire to always be liked, to always be popular. Because the truth is, the life of a Christian, what Paul writes about, is that our life is to lift up Jesus, not ourselves. To make others see Jesus through us, not look at us and say, wow, you're a really great person for doing that. No, actually, it's just the grace of God working through me. It's all about Jesus. But the truth is, it's really hard to give up those three things. It's really hard to give up the desire to be in control, the desire to be right, the desire to be liked. It's really hard to put everything down and pick up our cross. But the good news is that Jesus did it. And as Paul writes today, that righteousness is not yours because you're a good person. It's yours because of your faith in Jesus. And as long as we have that faith, God looks at us and sees righteous people. People living out the life that God has intended for us. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't try. Amen.